We're live and direct here. This is just going to be a post-fight roundup for the fights I didn't cover on the weekend. There was Ray Beltran. He fought. He scored a spectacular knockout. Also the Andre Dirrell Uzcategui. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that surname right there, but the Jose Uzcategui Andre Dirrell fight ended in very controversial fashion. And there's also the Gary Russell Jr. versus Escandon fight. So I'm going to be talking about those. As ever, let me just sort out these little settings. Shout out to everybody in the chat room. Future King says too early. I'm in college. Will Pinkerton, Olga Hatman, Olga. Work's dead, why not? Why not indeed? Well, I'm only covering these. I don't want to say they're major fights, are they? They're kind of minor fights, so if I'm covering more headline fights, headline topics, then it will be done at a better time for people. But for now, let's talk about these fights on the weekend. Did you see any of these fights? Did you see Gary Russell Jr. versus Escandon? Did you see Dirrell versus Uzcategui? What did you think of their performances? Personally, I felt like Gary Russell looked a little rusty to me. Shout out to McGregor. Shout out to Wesley. Shout out to Jay Don. Yeah, I felt like Gary Russell was a little rusty. But he did his thing. He got the win. I think that was the longest layoff of Gary Russell's career. So you have to expect him to be a little bit rusty. He got the job done at the end of the day. Yes, big up Seller every time. Adam Streets. Who, in your opinion, I guess that you mean the best boxer in the heavyweight division right now? Well, in terms of the best active boxer, perhaps Anthony Joshua, but until all the guys fight each other, then it's really impossible to say definitively who is the best. But I would say right now, probably Joshua, but who knows in terms of best active boxer, because Tyson Fury's got his issues. He's out the ring at the moment. We don't know when he's going to be back. Really impressed by Crawford and Anthony Yarde, says Jeffrey Elliott. Yeah, Crawford's always impressive to me. Motion Alex says, agree, Russell fought the wrong fight. He should have fought him from the outside. Yeah, to me, Russell just looked, he looked rusty. That's all I can say. He looked rusty. And all that time out of the ring, I guess you have to expect that. He's going to be rusty. All right, let me just sort out something here, people. 1 second. Bear with me. I also want to talk about this Ray Beltran fight. A lot of people were saying that was maybe knockout of the year. I'm not sure how to pronounce his opponent's name. Jonathan Maicelo, is that how you pronounce it? It was a great left hook. Separated the guy from his senses. Sent him to an alternate universe. Yeah, it was definitely a good knockout. Definitely a good knockout. There's life in the old dog yet, Ray Beltran. Still got a few decent wins in him, maybe. If he can get himself back in. Alright, hang on a second here. Trying to get these things sorted here. Info and settings. Okay. Live control room. Sorry, people. I'm just looking at the live settings. All right, I think I'm good to go. Yeah, I was also impressed with, as I say, Terence Crawford. He always impresses me. there's still kind of debate about Anthony Yard's height. People are telling me Anthony Yard is short. He's not 6 feet tall. Well, early on in Anthony Yard's career, he was listed as being 5'9", but now he's listed as being 6 feet tall. And from, judging from how he looks in terms of his height against the opponents he's faced so far, he looks like a legit 6 foot tall to me. I mean, he's fighting light heavyweights. He wouldn't be taller than everybody if he was 5'9". I mean, how short are the guys he's fighting if he's 5'9"? I mean, how short is Chris Hobbs if Anthony Yard is 5'9"? Well, Chris Hobbs must be about 5'7" then. And there's no way that Chris Hobbs is 5'7". Chris Hobbs is listed as 5'11", and he looks shorter than Anthony Yard. So, yeah, I reckon Anthony Yard's a legit 6 foot tall. Who will win versus, Brook versus Spence? I'm going with Spence. I think Spence is going to win. EFC TV says, Hatman, mate, you were wrong last night about Joshua in sparring. Was I? I mean, I can't say I was right or wrong. That's just what Daniel Dubois said. He was asked by Ellie Sekbak, did you drop Joshua in sparring? And he said, yes, that did happen. Don't blame Dirrell's uncle for going mad because it was the second time that happened to his nephew. Yeah, let me talk about this Andre Dirrell fight against Uzcategui. Dirrell is, as we all know, a very talented fighter. And he has shown heart in certain fights. And he was showing heart in the Uzcategui fight up until he got dropped. Now, when he got dropped after the bell, he wasn't acting in terms of when he went down. That was a legitimate knockdown. He landed on his face. He was seriously hurt. But when he was on the ground, you could see him talk to somebody outside the ring. And then all of a sudden he fell on his face again. That was some acting. That was reminiscent of the Arthur Abraham situation. He was trying to get a disqualification. He was trying to get exactly what he got. A win without actually having to win. So, I don't know. A leopard can't change his spots. And Dirrell, even though he has shown heart in certain fights, he's also shown quit in certain fights, like the Abraham fight, and here again in a similar situation. It's kind of like Victor Ortiz. I don't want to say he's as bad as Ortiz. Ortiz did show heart that one time against Andre Berto, but before and after that fight, we've seen what Ortiz has done in terms of quitting. Even in Ortiz's rematch with Berto, you look at Ortiz at the end of the fight, he basically quit. And yeah, what Dirrell's uncle did, I mean, at the end of the day, people are acting like it's shocking and terrible for something like that to happen, somebody to punch someone in the face in a boxing ring. I mean, it's not really that shocking. We're just watching two people punch each other in the face, but it was a cheap shot. That's the thing. And it was without gloves, and it was when the guy wasn't expecting it. It was after the fight. It was a cheap shot by Dirrell's uncle, and he deserves any punishment that's coming to him. It was a cheap shot. Levi Dean says, do you think Joshua will actually spend time in the Mayweather camp to enhance his defense? I'm not sure. But one interesting thing that Anthony Joshua did say is that he was maybe overtrained for the Klitschko fight. And I can see that, because in the final workout before the fight, which I think was at the Wembley Arena, Joshua looked very, very lethargic on the pads. A week or two before, he'd looked extremely sharp on the pads. But just a couple days before the fight at the Wembley Arena, he looked very lethargic. So maybe he was overtrained. It can happen. It's very common, actually, in boxing for fighters to get overtrained, because fighters are often, particularly young fighters like Joshua, they're so subservient to their coaches. They just put all their trust and faith in the coach, and they don't listen to their own bodies a lot of the time. If their coach says, yeah, you can do this drills, you can do this, you can do that, and this is going to benefit you, they just listen to them and they don't listen to their own bodies. Not every fighter can train to the same intensity level and still remain effective. Some fighters will get worn out and overtrained a lot easier than other fighters. So you have to know your fighter, you have to know yourself, you have to know your own body, you have to know what level of training you can take your body to and still remain effective. You have to know what type of training is best for each individual fighter. So I could see Joshua was maybe a bit overtrained in that fight, possibly, possibly. Shout out to Charlie Edwards. Shout out, big up. Yeah, Motion Alex says, it's funny how Russell said that Escandon tried to smother his speed by roughing him up on the inside, and Russell said he didn't let him do that, but I thought that's exactly what happened. Indeed, I agree. That is what happened. McGregor says Dirrell has the police looking for him after what he did to Jose Uzcategui. Indeed he does. Looks like he's got a case. Reese Taylor says, I've met Yard and he was shorter than 5'11". I also know somebody who has met and actually knows Anthony Yard, and he says Yard is legitimately 6 feet tall. So if Yard is shorter than 5'11", how short are all his opponents that he's been fighting? How short is Chris Hobbs? How short are all these guys? Because they're all shorter than him. Yard hasn't fought anybody yet that was taller than him, that either his height or shorter. So there must be a hell of a lot of short light heavyweights out there that that they're finding for him. A point deduction would have sufficed. Yeah, I reckon so. But it seemed to be a very pro Dirrell referee and pro Dirrell commission and all that kind of stuff. LFC 91. They just seemed determined to disqualify Uzcategui. I mean, it was fractionally after the bell. It wasn't like way after the bell. I've seen way worse stuff than that. I mean, look at Dillian Whyte when he fought Anthony Joshua. Joshua hit him slightly after the bell. Dillian Whyte went on a rampage way after the bell and started, clapping up Joshua. So when you look at the Holyfield Bowl fights, they went on and after the bell, particularly in the rematch, the second fight. There was all kinds of after the bell stuff. But although, those didn't result in people getting knocked out. Yeah, Dubois only had 3 fights. Dirrell can't win a fight without getting his opponent disqualified. The whole thing was scummy from the Dirrells. Yeah, the Dirrells are not the most likable bunch, I have to say. They all come across as diva-ish and just not a particularly nice bunch of people, the Dirrells. That's how they come. I never met them, obviously, but they don't come across as a particularly nice bunch of people. Always whining and complaining, and they've got this very aloof attitude. Yeah, I'm not really a fan of them as people. It has to be said. And, what the uncle did, I was pretty low. Charlie Edwards says Joshua was definitely too heavy and overtrained. Yeah, a lot of people have said that he was too heavy for that fight. So, even he himself has kind of commented on that and said maybe he was too heavy. Have you heard what Floyd said about Davis facing Lomachenko? If yes, what do you think about it? I actually didn't, so please fill me in. What did he say about Davis facing Lomachenko? All I've heard about him was after Davis's last fight when he won the title, and basically Floyd was asked, is he going to fight Lomachenko? And Floyd said no. So they're just blatantly ducking Lomachenko and avoiding him. That's all I know. Adam Street says, do you think McGregor would suit the boxing welterweight division? I don't think McGregor has any business in a boxing ring, to be honest. Big up Muhammad. Yeah, first daytime stream. Joshua needs a new trainer. Maybe. Reese Taylor says, Yard is 6 foot in the morning, 5'10" in the evening. Actually, yeah, they do say that you shrink a little bit throughout the day. Like when you wake up in the morning, you can shrink as much as maybe an inch. And if you're a really heavy set person, then yeah, you could shrink, I guess, an inch, maybe a half an inch in height. McCracken is a great coach. Well, here's the thing. I'm not going to say McCracken's not a good coach. But there is no one size fits all coach for everybody. You have to find a coach which is right for a specific fighter. Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Dylan Gallagher, how long can y'all keep making 175? I really don't know, because he had to strip naked to make it. This is the first time he's actually made 175. A lot of people might not realize that. First time he's made it. Thoughts on Crawford calling out Pacquiao? Do you think Crawford will move up in weight and that fight will actually take place in November, says Connor Boyd? I don't think Crawford... You know what? I'm not sure where the Pacquiao fight would happen. If Pacquiao would come down in weight, because it's not really about the belts, I don't think, for Crawford. It's just about the actual fight, the passing of the torch fight. So I hope Pacquiao Crawford happens later on in the year. I guess it depends on how Pacquiao feels and how he does against Jeff Horn. That's a fight that Bob Arum really wants for obvious reasons. So I'm not sure if it's going to happen. If it don't happen, then I'd like to see Terence Crawford become boxing's only current undisputed champion by beating Julius Ndongo, if he can beat Ndongo. Clarissa Shields was defending the uncle. Why? Relic keeps getting robbed. I've heard about that, didn't see it. J Don says, yeah, the IFL interview says he could have been a bit heavy, overtrained. I'm a little bit behind with your comments here, people. I'm trying to catch up, so bear with me. Joseph says, I honestly don't want to see a Klitschko Joshua 2 fight. I want to see the Pulev fight. That's the first person I've seen that really wants the Pulev fight. I mean, it's mandatory, so he should be fighting him. Heavyweight boxing fan seems to think AJ is the first unified boxer in history to have a 100% KO rate. I haven't really looked that up. Is he the first unified boxer to have a 100% KO rate? I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure about that. But having a 100% KO rate against the level of opposition Joshua's fought so far is neither here nor there, really. I mean, other than Klitschko, he hasn't been fighting the greatest guys out there, so we'll see how his KO rate holds up as he continues fighting top level fighters. Inevitably, it's going to drop off, you would imagine. The Hitman says, I wish Pac-Man would fight Crawford and drop that belt at 147. Me too. You know, I just wish he would fight Crawford regardless if he drops the belt or not. McGregor says, Yard looks short for some reason to me. Definitely looks shorter than 6 foot. Then again, I've never met him in person. Why are they questioning Joshua's trainer? He won and that's it, says Joseph. I think they're questioning Joshua's trainer because Joshua defensively wasn't that good in the fight. He did get dropped. He did get hit quite a lot. So there's always room for improvement. Seller says Shields and Dirrell brothers are all from Michigan. She shouldn't be defending the uncle. I agree. I agree. 100%. I think Pulev will take step aside money and fight Takam for the interim title. To me, that seems like a more logical thing to do. It seems more logical to me. From the Sauerland side of things, why not fight Takam? It's a more winnable fight for him. A less dangerous fight. Not that Takam isn't a good fighter, he is. But Takam is not as, I don't think anyway, as good as Joshua. Yes, big up DJ Slicks. Big up. Kyle Murray says, I want to see Eubank Jr. versus DeGale. Me too. Me too. And the timing is probably right for that fight. DeGale is not really interested in it because he says that Eubank Jr. don't have anything he wants. He's only got an IBO belt and all that. But stylistically, I like the fight. Dirrell's coming off a very tough fight against Badu Jack. Both guys, I think, match up well together in a fight. I reckon it will definitely be a good fight. Yeah, definitely. Motion Alex says he's quoting Floyd Mayweather here talking about the possibility of his fighter Davis fighting Lomachenko. He says we're really going to take our time, but one thing I want to say is that we're not ducking or dodging any opponent. Yeah, that is a contradiction, because they don't want no parts of Lomachenko right now. They don't want no parts of Lomachenko right now. And as I keep saying, I'm somebody who believes that if you've got a championship belt, you should be willing to fight anybody. Because when you got a championship belt, when you got a world title, you're saying that you're the best in your division. You're saying you're world champion. You're calling yourself world champion. Well, if you're the world champion, you should be willing to fight anybody then. Especially the other champions, actually. Alex the Chef says, why are you so high on Spence when he doesn't even move his head? Davis is much more well-rounded, the real next American star. Fighters have strengths and weaknesses. Davis is a guy who's come out of obscurity, really. Whereas I know a lot more about Errol Spence than I know about Davis, including from his amateur days. And I've been tracking him all the way through his professional career. So if I know more about a guy, I'm going to talk about him more. I don't know that much about Davis. He really was plucked from obscurity by Mayweather. But he looks good so far. There are a lot of people who, you know, really resent the attention that Spence is getting, or the respect that Spence is getting from a lot of people. Pro Kell Brook fans, obviously. And that's all good. But I just feel like Spence, people say that he's made his name from sparring rumors. Well, we're not talking about him having one sparring session with one top fighter and doing well. We're not talking about that. We're talking about Errol Spence getting the better of, or at least holding his own with, several top fighters while he was just a young pro with only a handful of professional fights. He bashed up Adrian Broner in sparring. He gave Mayweather a black eye and more than held his own in that sparring session. Did the same with Sean Porter, Lamont Peterson, and all these top fighters when he only had a couple professional fights under his belt. Do you know the level of confidence it takes to go in there and do that kind of stuff? Apparently, he had a bust up with Floyd Mayweather in the gym after they sparred because Mayweather felt disrespected by the way that Errol Spence was behaving in the sparring session, in terms of just literally trying to knock Floyd out. Mayweather kind of felt disrespected by that, and they had some altercation apparently where Spence nearly got barred from the gym. Now, when I heard that, immediately my ears perked up and I said, this is somebody I need to watch. Because he's not one of these guys who's coming kissing Floyd's ass, you know, one of these young fighters. Oh God, Floyd, you're amazing. No, he's not doing that. He's saying, I don't give a damn who you are. I don't care what you've done. That kind of attitude is what it takes to make it at the highest level in boxing. To not have the respect for people like that, for you know, for other fighters like that in the ring. To just go in there and do your thing. And on top of that, the performances that he has had in a professional ring against the opposition he's faced, he's done very, very well. He took out Chris Algieri. Khan couldn't do that. Pacquiao couldn't do that. He took out Leonard Bundu. Keith Thurman couldn't do that. So these are not extremely high-level opposition, but if you compare his performances against them to top fighters out there who fought the same guys, he did better. There's no question about it. Have I ever seen Spence box on the back foot? Brooks gonna push him back and blast him straight down the pipe, says Rough Mush. I have seen Spence box on the back foot. If you saw the The Bundu fight, he was boxing on the back foot for short spells during the fight. See, here's the thing. And indeed, McGregor says, I like Spence self-belief. He truly believes in himself. He does. He has supreme confidence. Here's the thing about Spence. Spence, in my view, is a more rounded fighter than Kell Brook. Kell Brook is a long-range guy. That's what he is. He's a long-range / mid-range fighter. That's his comfort zone. He's not a guy that can fight on the inside. Kell Brook is not really a guy that likes coming forward that much. When he does come forward, he tends to get himself caught more. He prefers to stand in the middle of the ring, use his jab. You know, sometimes he can come forward, but it's not like he's a pressure fighter. It's not like he has pressure fighting skills. When he does come forward, he tends to come forward with his head high in the air and people catch him with right hands over the top. I mean, if you remember the Matthew Hatton fight, Kell Brook got caught a hell of a lot coming forward in that fight by Matthew Hatton of all people. So Brook is best like in the middle of the ring, on the back foot a little bit, counter punching, letting guys come in and cracking guys with them chocolate brownies down the pipe. Spence can fight on the inside. That's something that Kell Brook can't do. Spence is a much better body puncher than Kell Brook. Spence is a much better pressure fighter than Kell Brook. And Spence can also fight on the outside and on the back foot. He's not as good on the outside and on the back foot as Kell Brook is. He's not. But he can fight on the outside and on the back foot competently. Not as good as Brook can, but competently. So overall, Spence has a more rounded game, in my opinion, than Kell Brook. And I think it's going to be a good fight. You know, people are either one side of the fence or the other in an extreme way. They're saying, oh, Brook's going to destroy Spence, or Spence is going to destroy Brook. We'll see what happens in the ring, but I'm expecting a very competitive fight. I'm not expecting one guy to have an easy time. If Errol Spence goes in there and wins, he's going to have to fight for a shitstorm, because Kell Brook is a very proud man. He's a very tough man. He's strong. He's got skills. He'll be fighting in front of his hometown fans. So he's not going to go out easily. You know, he's going to go out swinging if he does lose. And he's definitely by far the best fighter that Errol Spence would have faced in a professional boxing ring. So I'm not expecting Errol Spence to go out there and have an easy time in the slightest. But I am picking him to win. I think stylistically, he's a bit wrong for Kell Brook. That's what I feel. And also Kell Brook coming down in weight with the eye injury, I take that into account as well. And I'm just edging towards Spence. I think he's going to do it. Do you think Brook and his fans will have excuses if he loses? Here's the thing about boxing, man, or anything really. When you let emotions get involved, when you let wishful thinking get involved, you always end up with egg on your face eventually. Joseph says Spence is unproven. Well, everybody's unproven until they fight somebody, right? Kell Brook was unproven until he fought Sean Porter. I mean, everybody's unproven. So just because he's unproven, it don't mean he can't prove himself in this fight. I mean, Anthony Joshua was unproven until he fought Klitschko. So sneaky bet on draw Brook Spence. Maybe. Chris Thompson says I put all my wages on Brook winning. I can't imagine. I mean, I don't want to say that, but I feel like Brook is a better boxer than Spence. He throws better straight punches. I think he's a more natural boxer, a more natural counter puncher than Errol Spence is. So if it was to go points, I mean, you don't know what could happen. There could be knockdowns and all that kind of stuff. But if it was a boxing match and it's a technical kind of fight and it goes points, you would probably imagine, particularly in Brook's hometown and home country, him having the advantage on the scorecards, you know, just from a stylistic point of view. For Errol Spence to win this fight, he has to apply pressure, in my view. I don't think he can stand on the outside and outbox Kell Brook. He can box with him and be competitive, but it's going to be tight, and Brook's probably going to get the edge on the outside, particularly with his hometown fans cheering every clean shot he lands, or even every not so clean shot that he lands. You know, a shot that's maybe half blocked, they'll be screaming, and that might influence the judges subconsciously. So for Errol Spence to win the fight, he's got to get Kell Brook in the trenches and do what Errol Spence does best, which is go to the body. And when you've got a guy in Brook who is coming down in weight, and Errol Spence is a big guy himself, by the way. Errol Spence is just as big as Brook, if not, you know, slightly taller. And, you know, his body size is big too. But he's been staying at 147. He hasn't been going up to 160 like Brook has. And also, Errol Spence don't blow up in between fights the way Brook does. Brook is known to blow up in weight between fights quite often. Attacking a guy's body when he's maybe weight drained, that could prove fatal. I mean, you guys might remember when Timothy Bradley fought Brandon Rios. Now, Brandon Rios is known for having an iron jaw. I never in a million years imagined that Tim Bradley could knock out Brandon Rios, but that's exactly what he did, because Rios was an absolute ghost at the weigh-in. He was totally depleted and weight drained. And even a guy who's not a big puncher like Tim Bradley managed to stop an iron-jawed guy like Brandon Rios because he was drained. JD says it's Spence's lack of head movement. Yeah, Spence doesn't move his head that much, but neither does Kell Brook. I mean, Kell Brook is very, very upright. Charlie Edwards says, what do you think about Yard getting a shot at a European title so early? Well, it's only the WBO European title. It's not the actual EBU European title. It's just the WBO European title. So the opponent that he's going to be facing for in that fight is pretty obscure. Opinion on Howard Foster. Oh, yes. Noor Ibrahim. Howard Foster is going to be the referee for Brook versus Spence. And we know that Howard Foster loves his early stoppages. He's notorious for that. Casa Collins said Brook looks kind of weak, or looked kind of weak in the limited footage sparring. Cox was getting ripped to the body. Think that will cut him down if Spence attacks the body early. Yeah. O'Hara Davis versus Josh Taylor. I think it's a great fight. Somebody in my video, which I did yesterday about the Davis Josh Taylor fight, they seem to think that I was saying that anybody who thinks Josh Taylor's going to win is wishful thinking. No. When I was talking about O'Hara Davis and wishful thinking, I was more referring to the Derry Matthews fight and some of the other opponents that O'Hara's gone up against, and just O'Hara in general, people's attitude towards him, saying that he's not very good, he's this, that, and the other. I think it's wishful thinking. I think O'Hara Davis is a very good fighter. Josh Taylor is also a very good fighter. I think it's going to be a great fight. I think it's going to be very competitive. I'm leaning towards O'Hara to win it. He's got more professional experience. And I don't know, there's just something I can't put my finger on with O'Hara Davis. I can understand people say he looks unpolished and he looks clumsy at times and all that, but the stuff that O'Hara does well, his punching power, those very long arms, his accuracy with a jab and a right hand, he's just very effective. He's one of those kind of guys, I don't want to say like Deontay Wilder because he's not that sloppy, but he's just one of those kind of guys who looks ungainly and clumsy, but his strength and his punching power just keeps people in check. And it's been the same story. I know people don't like talking about sparring, but it's been the same story behind the scenes in sparring. O'Hara Davis apparently is an absolute nightmare in sparring, and he's known to bash up top level guys in sparring and has been for many, many years. Groves, fourth time lucky. We'll see. Groves, I'm not sure how Groves is reacting to the situation with Goodneck, because I've seen some interviews with Groves and I don't know, man, he might be a bit haunted by the Goodneck situation. We'll have to wait and find out. Does Huey beat Parker? On Parker's last performance, I would say Huey has the ability to beat Parker, but does Huey have the confidence I don't know. Some guys have got the ability, but they don't have the confidence and the self-belief. And that's the thing. But physically, I think he has the ability and the boxing skills. Chris Thompson says, we'll go in Spence's favour for a stoppage. I'm not sure if that's your prediction or if you're saying that with regards to Howard Foster being the ref. Let me see some of these other comments here. Bone injuries don't normally have reoccurring issues. Bone injuries, repairs, muscle injuries are more damaging. Yeah, bones do tend to heal better than tissue injuries. In fact, bones can actually heal stronger after a fracture than they were before the fracture, because the calcium all builds up around the fracture and actually becomes stronger. But this is an eye injury, so it's not only the bone, it's also the damage to the tissue around the eye. I mean, did you see how Kell Brook's eye looked in the Golovkin fight? The doctors told Kell Brook that a few more heavy blows on that eye and he could have actually gone blind. That's how dangerous an injury that was. Swan says, who's your favorite fighter to watch at welterweight? I would say right now, Keith Thurman and Errol Spence, I would say, are my favorite fighters to watch at welterweight. Alex the Chef says, Porter said recently on IFL he's never sparred Spence, even though people have said he has. A bit weird. Yeah, that is a bit weird. I'll have to go and watch that. But he certainly sparred all these other guys because they've confirmed it. He did spar Mayweather, Broner, Peterson, so on and so forth. Elio Coletta says, I really like the way O'Hara handled the situation with Floyd Mayweather. Most other young fighters would melt in that situation. Yeah, they would. They would. And I also like that. Charlo, good sparring for Spence. Simo A says, Charlo, good sparring for Spence. Who does Brook spar? Indeed. I think the sparring that Spence is getting for this fight is way better than the sparring Brook is getting. No disrespect to the guys Brook sparring, but they're not on the level of the, Charlo. So, yeah, I think Spence is getting a better sparring here. Chisora and White both pulling out fights at the same time. Do you smell a rematch? Yes, I do. That's what seems to be the logical conclusion here. Chisora pulling out of the Helenius rematch. White pulling out of the White rematch. Maybe both guys said, you know what, we're just not going to make any kind of money fighting these particular fights. Rumors that White was maybe not selling the tickets for the O2. So they're like, you know what, we can probably sell out the O2 with a White Chisora rematch. So let's go down that route. And if they can put some type of incentive there, a ranking incentive for Dillian Whyte, then he'll do it. If they say, okay, this will be a final eliminator or some type of eliminator for the WBC title, then I'm sure Whyte will go for it. Another reason why Golovkin will destroy Canelo. All right, I didn't see your previous comment there, Connor Boy, to put that in context. Chris Thompson says Joshua needs to fight as mandatory and then unify with Parker or Wilder. Anthony Dirrell will fight Callum Smith next. Who you got in that fight? Hatman. I'm leaning towards Callum Smith, but he's got to travel, in it. Is that fight going to be in the US or the UK? I am leaning towards Callum Smith. Anthony Dirrell's a good fighter. Not the most skilled guy in the world, but he can bang. I'm leaning towards Callum Smith, but yeah, I don't know. How well will he travel if he has to travel? Hatman, what do you think of Floyd turning into a mouse when AJ walked in the room after all that smack talk on IFL? I mean, at the end of the day, Floyd is a great fighter, but he's a little man. He's 5'8". You know, he weighs like 150 pounds. AJ's 6'6". He weighs 250 pounds. So you can have all the accolades and whatever you want. At the end of the day, face to face, Joshua would eat him for breakfast, obviously. So he's not going to really start hyping up to Joshua face to face, is he? Who should Furman fight when he's back from the elbow injury? Actually, I saw a picture of that elbow injury that Keith Furman has. That looked bad. That looked bad. His elbow's all discolored and bruised, and his whole arm. Yeah, that looks like a pretty bad injury he's got there. Who should he fight when he's back? The winner of Brooks Spence? Yeah, I'd like to see him to fight the winner of Brooks Spence, definitely. And if it's Spence who wins that fight, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Keith Furman because they're both Al Haymon fighters. They're both American. Errol Spence is going to be calling him out. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Keith Furman, and that's good. There needs to be a lot of pressure on it. We need to get these unification fights made. Let's Go Champ says, which current welterweights would you pick McGregor to beat? Would you pick him against people like Rios or Malignaggi? I mean, he might have a chance against those guys, but not a great chance. I probably wouldn't pick him against any of the welterweights in the top 10 or top 15, maybe even top 20. I wouldn't pick McGregor against them. Dylan Gallagher says, Galahad said Brook was sparring Ryder. John Ryder, yeah, you know. John Ryder, a far cry from Errol Spence. I know Ryder's a big guy and everything, but not in Spence's league in terms of skills and ability. Chisora White was a great fight. Would love to see it again in the build-up. Me too, says Chris Thompson. Davis or Russell, who you got? Based on their last performances, I would have to go with Davis. That's in response to Motion Alex. Yeah, Russell looked rusty to me. He looked rusty. Casa Cawley says US. I guess that's in regards to the Anthony Dirrell Callum Smith fight. It's going to be in the US. Levity says, what you think about Daniel Dubois? You think Frank Warren is the right promoter for Dubois? Frank needs his fighters. Frank feeds his fighters tomato cans. Look what happened with Tommy Langford, Liam Walsh, etc. Yeah, but now that Frank Warren has teamed up with BT Sport, he's going to be in a better position to get his fighters the fights that they need and the opponents that they need. Box Nation really was an obscure place, you know, for the longest while. But now that they've teamed up with BT Sport, he's going to have a bit more money to play with, more exposure. So he should be able to get his fighters better fights at the correct time. And Frank Warren is a good promoter, by the way. You know, he's maybe a little bit behind in terms of keeping up with current events and the current, you know, state of play, the current zeitgeist that we live in. He's not quite in touch with the youth, and he needs to be. But he knows how to build fighters' careers. He knows how to make fights and all that kind of stuff. He's been around a very long time. Frank Warren has put on some of the best cards I've ever seen in British boxing. You know, particularly back in the 90s, he was putting on great cards, Frank Warren. So he is a good promoter. I'm not necessarily very fond of him on a personal level, but can he put on good fights and good shows? Yes, he can. Can he build fighters? Yes, he can. Connor Boyd says, when you mention about Brooks' eye and the risk of him going blind, that's one of the reasons I think Golovkin will beat Canelo, because he won't handle Golovkin's pressure. Yeah, I've always felt, well, for the longest I felt Golovkin will beat Canelo, but in boxing, timing is everything. And I see it as a much closer fight now than I did a year ago. If this fight was happening September 2018 rather than September 2017, I'll probably pick Canelo. But right at the moment, I'm still kind of edging towards Triple G. But will Triple G's punch output be as low as it was against Danny Jacobs or even against David Lemieux? Because in the Jacobs and Lemieux fights, Golovkin's punch output was way lower than we're used to seeing it. And that would benefit Canelo. You know, when Golovkin's up against somebody who he sees as offensively formidable, his power punches you know, become less numerous and he uses his jab a lot more? Is that how he's going to fight Canelo? A lot more jabs and a lot less power shots? Because if he does, that's going to give Canelo a lot more of a chance, in my view. Not like his jab isn't great, because Golovkin's got a great jab, an underrated jab. Swan says, Joshua took Klitschko's power, so can he take Wilder's power? I think Wilder has the power to drop Joshua, and Joshua has the power to drop Wilder. The only thing about Wilder is, if Wilder does drop Joshua, Wilder will go for it. He won't stand off like Klitschko. I mean, Klitschko did go for it a little bit against Joshua, but Klitschko's never been much of a finisher. That's one thing that people are also not really taking into account. You look at any time Klitschko drops somebody and they get back up. Klitschko's not a great finisher. He's not a great combination puncher, Klitschko. So when he tries to finish a guy, he often looks a bit robotic and clumsy, and he's not the greatest finisher. He never has been. So that has to be taken into account, as well as the fact that he wasn't overly aggressive in trying to finish Joshua. And then on top of that, Klitschko was thinking about his own stamina. He was thinking, what if Joshua survives this? Thoughts on Ward not wanting to do any face-offs with Kovalev, and who you got in the rematch? I mean, I don't know about not wanting to do any face-offs and all that kind of... He has done a couple of face-offs since it's been announced. I don't know, man. I really don't know. The two camps don't like each other. We know that. The Ward people don't like the Kovalev people, vice versa. So, I don't know. Jadon says, do you think if Bellew fights one of the top heavyweights, he could get badly hurt? Or do you think he has the boxing ability to last? He did look tired fighting Hay as he was carrying extra weight. Yeah, Bellew actually said he was too heavy for the David Hay fight. Big up Jason Seeley. Thank you for watching, brother. Elio Coletta says, Hatman, who you got in the Stevenson Fonfara rematch and why? You got my name right, by the way. Thank you. All right. I got something right. Who have I got in the rematch? Well, Stevenson is so irrelevant at this point. I'm really disappointed by the way Stevenson's career has panned out over the past year or so. Fighting Fonfara again. He should be fighting his mandatory. Why isn't he fighting his mandatory? What's the guy's name again? The Colombian guy who just knocked out Lucian Bute. I always forget this guy's name. That guy's been Stevenson's mandatory for ages. And somehow he keeps ducking that mandatory. And that mandatory guy keeps on having to fight eliminator after eliminator. He's now fighting Jean Pascal. What is that all about? Thoughts on Sky dubbing Eggington the new Carl Froch at 147? Yeah, that's hype. That is hype. Chris Thompson says, do you think Tyson Fury will lose all the weight and come back? He said he was going to come back for May 8th, but gave up on that. What happens this time? I'm really not sure, because it depends on the UCAD situation. And, you know, I've seen people attacking Tyson Fury and defending UCAD and all this kind of stuff. It don't make any logical sense. If you think Tyson Fury is juicing, fine, that's cool. You think he's a drug cheat, whatever. But the fact is, if he is a drug cheat, why on earth has it taken UCAD 2 flipping years to resolve this, 2 years and counting, to resolve this Tyson Fury situation? How in the world can it take 2 years? That don't make sense, people. That does not make any sense. UCAD are incompetent at best. At best. Frank Warren has talked about this, and obviously Frank Warren is tied to the Fury, so he would come down on Fury's side. But still, just as an outsider looking in, something stinks with this UCAD Fury situation, man. There's something really, really wrong about it. Same Hussein says, do you think it's any coincidence Golovkin looked a lot worse since all year VADA testing? Somebody mentioned that recently. I think it was Billy Joe Saunders talked about that. I mean, who knows? Because there are two things that are happening at the same time. You've got the all year round VADA testing for Golovkin, but you've also got him fighting opponents which brings something to the table that he's never faced before. Kell Brook brought a speed and skill level that Golovkin had never faced before as a professional. And Danny Jacobs did, you know, brought speed, skill, and size. He was a lot bigger than Golovkin. That was a combination of attributes that Golovkin had never faced before in a professional fight against Danny Jacobs. So is it down to the drug testing? Is it down to the opponent? Is it a bit of both? I do not know. So now there's a conflict of interest, says LFC 91, with someone on the panel. Very strange. It is very strange. It's extremely strange. Spartacus the Great says, Hatman, when are you going to acknowledge the Illuminati are messing with Tyson Fury? Well, somebody's messing with him. You know, I wouldn't discount the idea that somebody is messing with him. That's what I'll say. I don't know about the Illuminati, but yeah. Thank you, Connor Boyd, Seller, and same is Alidier, or Alida, however you pronounce his first name, Alvarez. Yeah, that's the guy. That's the Colombian guy. That is Stevenson's mandatory, the guy he should be fighting. Have I talked about all the fights? Yeah, I talked about Gary Russell against Escandon. He knocked out Escandon in the 7th round. Escandon was down in the 3rd. You know, rusty performance I felt from Gary Russell, but he got the job done. Dirrell against Uzcategui, controversial ending. Close-ish fight, but most people had Uzcategui ahead. Obviously, there was the Terence Crawford-Diaz fight. Another good win for Crawford doing his thing. Hopefully he unifies in his next fight. Beltran knockout on the undercard. Talked about that. And talked about, I guess, the fallout of a lot of these other fights that have happened on the weekend. Alex the Chef says, I know it's the 100th time you've been asked about any update on the Bouncer series. Yeah, if anything non-boxing related will have to happen in another channel from now on, basically, because YouTube has changed the way they operate, and you know, they make it very difficult for people to do anything that is even slightly not politically correct or controversial in any way. They make it very difficult for you. So J Don says, I think Saunders is correct. A lot of these Americans are juicing. Remember Badou Jack against the Gale? He was like a brick wall, wasn't going anywhere, taking everything the Gale through. To be fair, Badou Jack is a very big guy. A very big guy. Can everyone please refer to Frank Warren as Fish Eyes? Yes, yes, we should. We should. Fish Eyes. Thoughts on Cal Yafai against Roman Gonzalez? I'll get back to you on that. Roman Gonzalez, did he get found out in his first loss? The Gale can't punch, man's got feathers in his hands. Yeah, the Gale, certain fights, he knocked guys out and he looked like a fairly decent puncher. But then against, excuse me, against the likes of even Porky Medina and Lucian Bute and Badou Jack, there didn't seem to be much power there. Yeah, Simo A says the Gale loses power after 4 rounds. I think it's safe to say that the Gale is not a natural puncher. Maybe when he really concentrates and sits down in his shots, he can have a bit of power for a couple rounds, but after that, he reverts back to type and he's not really a naturally heavy-handed guy. Chris Thompson says, thoughts on Coogan getting banned from Joshua Klitschko? I mean, it was all much ado about nothing, wasn't it? It was just Coogan had fallen out with the diva named Burnt Bonte, however you pronounce his name. Fell out with him, and he wanted Coogan banned from press row, basically. Coogan wasn't banned from the event, but he was banned from the press area, apparently. Hatman, are you Wenger in or Wenger out? Arsene Wenger. I'm not really a football guy like that, so I don't really care either way. But I do find it funny that Wenger's been there for so long. At the end of the day, he's making money for Arsenal, innit? He's one of the few managers in the Premiership that actually manages to turn a profit for their club year in, year out. And the board are happy with that. The board are, you know, buying their yachts and mansions and all that kind of stuff based on what Arsene Wenger's doing. He's running Arsenal like a business. He's not really running it like he wants to necessarily win anything. The main goal for Arsene Wenger is to turn a profit every year, not to win silverware. So, you know, it is what it is, man. Cougar moans everything, he's a diva. I found it interesting. This is what LFC91 said. He says Cougar moans everything, he's a diva. I found the IFL interview interesting, actually, where Coogan and Eddie Hearn were face to face after the Joshua Klitschko fight, and Eddie Hearn was just reminding Coogan of all the things that he's done for him, the access that he gets him, the fact that no other boxing journalist in the UK can get the access that Coogan gets. Just reminded him, look, you know, appreciate what I've done for you. Let's Go Champ says, Hatman, if you put your top 15 heavyweights of all time in a league where everyone had to face each other, who would be in your top 3? That's a hard question. Spartacus the Great says, Arsenal will get battered at the weekend by Chelsea. Most probably they will. Simo A says, Coogan got too big for his boots. Elevity says, do you think Derek Chisora versus Dylan White will happen? Or 2 will happen, and do you think Chris Eubank Jr. will fight somebody who can hurt him like Lemieux or Jacobs? The Eubanks have gone very quiet. I'm hoping to speak to them in the next few weeks, find out what's going on. I think a lot of it has to do with the pay-per-view numbers. A lot of it has to do with how happy or unhappy ITV were with their last event. That will dictate who the Eubanks can fight, because at the end of the day, they've got to put up the money to fight people. Yeah, if they're gonna get some top level opponent for Eubank Jr. to fight, they got to come up with the money for it. Unless Eubank wants to travel overseas, then they're gonna have to come up with the money for it if it's gonna be on ITV in the UK. And if they didn't do particularly good numbers on that first pay-per-view against Renaud Quinlan, then it's difficult to see them being able to secure a top-level opponent. Big up Boxing Guru. Shout out. Barry Hearn said they used to be slave owners. Yeah, Barry Hearn said the boxing, you know, boxing back in the days in the 90s and earlier was like a master-slave situation where the boxers were the slaves and they really had no rights and they were just being used and exploited. Yes, big up EJ Boxing Live. What's good, brother? Big up. What happened with Andre Dirrell's uncle, says T3 Triple D. Man, he smacked up Uzcategui, left hooked him, and now he's on the run from the police. Whether they've caught him or not, I don't know. Charlie Edwards says AJ versus Pulev ends similar to the Molina fight. Yeah, Pulev, I think, was really badly affected mentally by the Klitschko loss. He had a lot of confidence prior to that fight, but he was humiliated in the Klitschko fight. And I think that really took a lot from him mentally. Yes, big up Supreme. Big up. Howard Foster referee in the Spence fight. Indeed, Adam Scott. We always wince and cringe a little bit when Howard Foster's name is announced as the referee for a big fight, because we don't want any controversy. Connor Boyd says, I would really like to see Puller versus Ortiz. That will solve who is the real #1 contender. Yeah. And Ortiz might have to go a different route, you know, because he looks like he's really being sidelined at the moment. Because Joshua's really not talking about fighting Ortiz. He's talking about maybe fighting Pulev, but they're really trying to push Ortiz to the side. So Ortiz actually could step in and face Fraser Kendo for the regular version of the WBA belt, possibly. He could possibly do that. Then at least he'd have some form of title, and it'd still be mandatory for the super version of the title. So maybe they can work out something with that and appease Ortiz, give him a little trinket, let him fight a Kendo. He should be able to win that fight, you know. So that's a possibility for him. Reese Taylor talking about smoking a zoot with me. I don't actually smoke, bro. I don't actually smoke. Has Crawford been gifted his unification opportunity? Also, do you think he needs to step up his competition? If so, who would you like to see next? Has he been gifted? No. Crawford hasn't been gifted anything. He fought his main rival at 140 pounds in Victor Postal. A lot of people were picking Postal to win that fight. So now Crawford has done things the hard way. I'm not saying that the 140-pound division has been the strongest. It hasn't. Crawford hasn't been in a stacked division, but you know, he's faced the best in his division so far, and he's trying to face Ndongo to become undisputed. So we'll see how it goes. Hatman, you still getting chased by feds? You back in the UK? I guess I'm still getting chased by feds. Thoughts on Frank Warren changing his name by Depot to Fish Eyes? He needs to do it, man. JD says, will AJ go down to the TMT gym and learn some defensive and footwork skill to bash up the bum heavyweights they got? Yeah, I don't think he needs much defensive training to bash up the TMT heavyweights, if they even have any heavyweights in there. I'm not really sure what Floyd Mayweather could do for Joshua, to be honest, because heavyweights just simply can't do certain things that smaller fighters can do. You can't train heavyweights the same way you train smaller fighters, particularly not a heavyweight the size of Joshua. You know, he's huge. So I don't really know what Mayweather could teach him. He's not going to teach him the shoulder roll. Forget about that. That's not going to work for Joshua. You really need Joshua to be with somebody that has experience with heavyweights if you're going to, you know, give him to another trainer. Boxing Guru says Crawford is great. Spence Brook winner versus Crawford is best 147-pounder, in my opinion, even without Furman. Would love to see that winner versus Floyd, but that's dreaming. Yeah, Floyd ain't going to come back and fight nobody serious. He may fight McGregor for his 50th win, and that's it. He's not interested in any serious challenges at this point. Same Hussein says, any news on a Eubank interview, Hatman? Stay posted. I have Chris Eubank. I've corresponded with Chris Eubank Sr. I have his number. He's got my number. So stay posted. He's on my WhatsApp. Yeah, I mean, it's so weird to have Chris Eubank on your WhatsApp, but yeah. Simo A says, still want to see Ward versus Dirrell. Don't care. Always wanted to see it. Yeah, doubt we're gonna see it for now though. Ward's dealing with Kovalev, and Ward is fighting at the very highest level, whereas Dirrell, God knows what Dirrell's doing. God knows what Dirrell's doing, man. He officially won that fight on the weekend by disqualification. So I guess he's coming off a win of sorts. Yeah. What was that for? That was the interim IBF super middleweight title. So I guess the winner fights the Gale. So Dirrell's maybe in line to fight the Gale. I don't know. Badu Jack versus a Kovalev Ward 2 winner. I'm interested to see what Badu Jack can do in the weight class, because Badu Jack is a very textbook fighter. I mean, everything he does is just textbook. A very tight defense. He's much tighter defensively than Sergey Kovalev. He doesn't have Kovalev's power, but he's big. He's physically strong. I wouldn't be surprised if he's as big as Kovalev, if not bigger. He's technically good. He's a basic guy, but he does the basics very well. So I'd like to see him fight Kovalev, actually. I would favor Kovalev, but he does have the size and the skills and the ability to exploit a lot of the mistakes that Kovalev makes. And Kovalev makes plenty of mistakes. Kovalev is no defensive genius at all. Alex the Chef says, you were talking about the difference between the WBO European title and the EBU European title. Thought there was just one. Surely they don't need a regular version of that. Well, they do have several versions of the EBU title, but the WBO European title is completely different to the EBU European title. There are two different organizations. The EBU have the European title that we all know of, the widely regarded and recognized European title. They have a couple of them. And then the WBO, which is a completely different organization, they have now started with their own European title. So, yeah, the WBO European title is not very highly regarded. I don't know many people that have actually fought for it. And that's what Anthony Yarde will be fighting for in his next fight against some obscure opponent who Frank Warren mentioned after the fight, who I've never heard of before, but he's apparently got a decent record on paper. JD says, I agree, Hatman. I've tried to make the same point to my friend. Heavyweights are a different species to all other boxers. They simply cannot have the skill set of a welterweight. Yeah, they can't. They can't. You have to train them differently. You have to know that they can't do the same kind of maneuvers that smaller fighters can do. They can't throw the same kind of combinations. They can't pull off the same kind of moves. They just can't do it. And obviously their punch output is way lower than a welterweight. It has to be. It's impossible for them to, for most heavyweights anyway, to have the kind of work rate and whatnot of smaller fighters. It's especially the size of the heavyweights these days. 6'6" and 250 pounds. Frank says, best sucker punch, Dirrell's uncle or James Butler. Butler's punch was definitely more devastating. He broke the guy's jaw. Butler really was a scumbag, man. I believe he's in prison now for murder. He murdered Max Kellerman's, is it Max Kellerman's brother that he murdered? Yeah, Simo A says Dirrell had the talent to beat Ward, but not mentally strong as Ward. Definitely not mentally strong as Ward. The Dirrell team they just have this diva like vibe about them. Adrian Broner is drinking lean. Man, Adrian Broner's a mess. Adrian Broner's not serious about boxing. Adam Scott says Badu Jack is underrated. I agree. I agree. Triple H 1200 says Badu Jack is getting KO'd with the high guard in 175. Maybe. We'll see. David Haye versus Mike Tyson, current age. Who wins? David Haye, surely. Mike Tyson got beaten by Kevin McBride in his last fight about 10 years ago. Kevin McBride. So Kevin McBride was beating Tyson 10 years ago. David Haye, as over the hill as Haye is definitely beating Tyson right now. In fact, David Haye, the David Haye of today, would probably still beat the Tyson that fought Kevin McBride. Rough Mush says, I heard BJ Flores is fighting a kendo. I've heard Flores has put himself forward as a candidate to step in and fight a kendo for the WBA heavyweight regular belt. We'll see if it happens. I would rather it was Luis Ortiz or somebody else than BJ Flores. Who would win between a prime Mayweather and a prime Golovkin? I would say Golovkin. But, I mean, you never know, man. Maybe Mayweather will be able to get it done. We've never seen Mayweather in there with somebody that big and powerful who can cut the ring off that well. So I would go with Golovkin, but, man, you never know. Is Virgil Hunter the right move for Tony Yoka? That's a good question, actually. That is a good question. I guess he just has to find out how they communicate and how they get along and all that kind of business. But Tony Yoka is never going to be, you know, a big, powerful knockout artist as a heavyweight. So maybe it is right for him to be with someone who's going to concentrate more on technique and strategy and all that kind of thing. Tony Yoka, if he can make himself into a spoiler, a high-level spoiler, maybe he can do things and go places. Supreme says, how does a fight between Tyson and Marciano go in their prime? Tyson knocks out Marciano very, very easily. Do you think Dirrell was acting against Abraham, and was he playing yesterday? Well, I think he was acting in both situations, but when he went down yesterday, that wasn't acting when he initially got dropped, because that was, you know, he fell on his face. He was seriously hurt when he went down, but he could have got up, and you saw him talking to somebody outside the ring when he was on his knees, and then all of a sudden, after consulting with that person outside the ring, then he dropped on his face. It's like, oh, come on, man. Who's better, Tony Yoka or Daniel Dubois, says Dirrell Carter. Dubois looks to have the better natural ability, natural gifts, but it's difficult to say at this stage. Tony Yoka has achieved a lot in amateur boxing. Aside from winning the gold medal, he also beat Joseph Parker. He's been around a long time in the amateur program, Tony Yoka. And he's got, you know, he's been getting wins. So his style don't look pretty. He don't look like a big, powerful guy and, you know, scoring all the knockouts. But he's obviously doing something right. Some fighters, their style is ugly, but they're effective with it. Yoka's going to have to be a guy who plans on going 12 rounds for most of his fights, at least at top level. If he can make himself, if he can master the art of spoiling and messing fighters around, then maybe Yoka could go places. We'll see. Do you think Daniel Dubois is a future opponent for AJ? Probably. Yeah, at some point, probably. I mean, Dubois has got a long way to go. He looks the part, but we ain't seen him get hit back by anybody that can really fight. So, you know, long way to go for Daniel Dubois. He's only 19 years old. This is a stick up. Anybody think Brook is in trouble come Saturday? This heavyweight cut will show up when Spence starts to dig in those ruthless body shots. Yeah, I fear for Brook's body, his rib cage, man. Spence, in my view, is the best body puncher in boxing today. Alevity says, Ike Ibeabuchi versus Mike Tyson. Who would have won? Tyson is far more proven than Ibeabuchi, but Ibeabuchi definitely had the physical ability, in my view, to beat Tyson. I mean, Ibeabuchi kind of reminded me of like a bigger, more powerful version of Holyfield. Not as quick as Holyfield, maybe not quite as skilled, but a similar style to Holyfield, and obviously very tough. He proved that in the David Tua fight. Question marks. Hatman, smoking that good? Sounds like it, respectfully. I don't actually smoke, but I do have a raspy voice. And on this particular microphone, obviously my voice sounds a bit different than it does on the normal microphone phone I use, which is a studio mic that has a greater dynamic range. So this particular mic only picks up a very small range, audio range. So yeah. Rough Mush says, Hatman, have you heard about BJ Flores fighting a kendo for the WBA regular? WTF is that all about? Yeah, I've heard about it. I haven't heard that it's actually happening, but I've heard that Kendo put himself forward for it. Hopefully that don't happen. That's even worse than Briggs versus Kendo. Many heavyweights are going to be hyped now because everybody's looking for the next AJ, says Simo A. Yep, they definitely are, because they're seeing the amount of money that AJ is generating. And every promoter wants a part of that. So Seller says, Hatman, what do you think of Demetrius Andrade in his career so far? Andrade is a fighter I have been tracking for a few years. I think he's very talented. He didn't particularly look good in his last fight against Kulke. Even though he won, he didn't look that great. Maybe that was the layoff. Maybe he was fighting away from home. I don't know. But I'd like to see him in the mix with the remaining Charlo at 154. Erislandy Lara. I believe he lost to Lara in the amateurs. So I'd like to see him get more of a move on. Definitely. And get in the mix there. Because I do rate him. I do like Andrade as a fighter. Elevity says, I know David Tua versus Mike Tyson would have been good as well. Yeah, that would have been a good fight. Jacko 200, think Price will return. I guess you mean David Price. I don't know, man. I wish David Price all the best. I watched some Anthony Yard fight and I don't see what you find amazing in him. Well, what I find amazing in Anthony Yard is that he only had 11 amateur fights. And as a professional, he's had, what, 10 professional fights? So to have the kind of technique that he has after only having 20 fights or 21 fights in his whole life, that is impressive. Look at most people who only had 11 amateur fights and look at their technique and then compare it to Anthony Yard's technique. Yard is a precocious talent. That don't mean he's going to go all the way and do this, that, and the other, but, you know, the fact that he's able to have the technique that he has with such little fight experience is very impressive. He's obviously somebody who learns very, very quickly. And he can punch. He's fast, you know. McGregor, Hatman, Steve Bunt said Jeff Lacey was a better fighter than Gervonta Davis. I know, and I cringed when he said that. Absolute BS. There is no way that Jeff Lacey is a better fighter, in my opinion, than Gervonta Davis. One thing he said that was correct, though, is that Calzaghe was a hell of a lot better than Liam Walsh. That should go without saying, really. Conor Boyd said there's rumors that Price could be Fury's comeback opponent. Poor David Price. Poor David Price. Mormek had like 10 amateur fights and became unified world champion. Yeah, but after 10 amateur fights, look at what Mormek looked like early on in his career. His technique was sloppy. He didn't look slick and polished the way that Anthony Yard does. And by the time that Mormek won a world title, he had had a lot more fights than Anthony Yard has had now. So what you're saying is irrelevant. Wait until Yard has had 20, 30 fights for his first world title, and then we'll see how he looks. Bunce is an absolute mess, says Simo A. Since BT got involved, he's scared to mess it up. I think Bunce is just an absolute mess in general. You know, I think he's just a mess in general, man. You know what? I like David Price. I like David Price, but you know his fights, his fights are entertaining. Will Bunce last on BT? I hope BT have got more quality control than Box Nation. Box Nation felt like an old boys club. It felt like Frank Warren got all his old friends from the boxing circuit over the years and just gave them jobs because he knows them. And you know, some of them got some of their friends from the pub and that they drink with and got them jobs just through association rather than through talent. I hope with BT Sport there's more of a quality control when it comes to who actually gets jobs as presenters and commentators and whatnot. But I have to say, the production value since Box Nation teamed up with BT Sport is vastly improved. You know, the Box Nation shows now with BT Sport are way better in terms of production value than they were before when it was just Box Nation. Simo A says Bunce's quality people take him too serious. Well, I've actually met Steve Bunce in real life several times over the years, and yeah, the less said about that, the better. Uh, I wasn't I wasn't very taken with him, to be honest with you. And many people that have met him will tell you the same thing. No, Bunce has got a very, very big ego. I can tell you that. That's one thing I'll tell you about him. He's a very egotistical guy, an insecure guy. You know, I'm not really a fan of him as a person, and I don't think he's very good as a presenter. But you know, the presenter thing is, how can I describe it? It's personal preference. Some people might like the way Bunce comes across as a presenter, and that's cool. I ain't got no problem with that. Me personally, I don't really think he's a good presenter, but that's just my personal taste. DJ Slick said, I thought McIntosh did well Saturday. Not many people like him, but he is growing on me. I think McIntosh is probably better as like a ringside reporter, interviewing fighters and all that kind of stuff. Whenever McIntosh commentates, I don't know, man. Like, uh, he's got such a bizarre style. Like, he commentates. McIntosh's commentary style is like a radio commentator from the 1970s or something. That's what McIntosh's style is like. So I think he's better as a ringside reporter rather than commentating on the fights. Triple H 1200 says Errol Spence is similar to a younger Triple G. Punch placement, but Spence is better at catching punches on his gloves and coming in at an angle versus square up. Yeah, I think there are similarities between Spence and Triple G. I don't think he's as naturally heavy-handed as Triple G pound for pound, but I think he's a bit quicker and he throws in combination more than Triple G does, particularly to the body. So yeah, there are similarities between Errol Spence and Triple G, I think. Tebow says, Hatman, a very serious question. When will you create some Hatman hats? Boy, I mean, that's a good idea. I just need to get the right logo. Hatman hats and t-shirts. Merchandise. Yeah, I need the right logo. I need to design a logo that looks good. Because I don't want to just put out any merchandise that looks anyhow and just says Hatman on it. No, I want it to actually look good. Has that Frank Bruno movie been cancelled? I did hear about this Frank Bruno movie, but I don't know what happened to it. Yeah, that'd be interesting to me, the Frank Bruno movie. DJ Slick says, do you think Eddie is eyeing up Dubois and Yard as Sky pay-per-view fighters in the next few years? We'll see. Depends on how powerful Eddie Hearn is. Eddie Hearn is actually trying to streamline his stable. He doesn't want to sign everybody these days. And actually, he turned down Dubois. Dubois actually went to Eddie Hearn. Was it Dubois? I think it was Dubois' people who went to Eddie Hearn and said, we've been made this offer by Frank Warren. Can you match it? And Eddie Hearn said, no, I can't match it. So yeah, there was no counter offer or anything like that. He just said we can't match it, so they signed with Warren rather than signing with Eddie Hearn. So he's trying to streamline. All right. Leo Coletta said would have a Hatman hat today, mate. Get it sorted. I'll definitely look into that, people. I'll definitely look into it. Did Martinez get robbed? Did Josh Warrington lose? A lot of people believe so. And has Warrington found his level? I'll come back to that. Some French boxing fans got interested in Dubois only because of his French name. Yeah, that is a very, very French name. The bad guy says, Hatman, bring back Topical Tuesdays. If I bring back Topical Tuesdays, it's going to be on a different channel. It won't be on this channel. Because YouTube has changed the way they deal with any type of controversial topic. They're making it very, very difficult for people to talk about anything that is even slightly controversial or not politically correct. They're basically destroying channels who talk about anything controversial. YouTube are actively doing this now. Charlie Edwards says Eddie's only interested in Olympians, the fool. Joe Kelly says, who do you think is the better fighter, Vitaly or Vladimir? Vladimir's got a better resume, but I feel like Vitaly's the better fighter. Triple H 1200 says, you think Wilder is being protected from Ortiz by moving him to number 3 in the WBC? They did the same thing to Andrade when he was number 1 WBC mandatory for Jamel. Possibly. Possibly. Simo A says, Hatman, I found a wife for you. Really? Who's that then? YouTube channel says Brooke Canelo at 154 and Brooke versus Eubanks at 160. Who you got? Very good question. I got Canelo. I'm not sure about Brooke Eubank. I'm not sure about that, you know, because I think Eubank struggles more with boxers than he does with pressure fighters. I think he likes pressure fighters, but somebody that can go throw good straight punches can give Eubanks Jr. a lot of problems. Yeah, good question by DJ Slicks. Any news on Josh Buatsi turning pro? He is the best of all the Olympians. He was definitely, out of the British Olympic team, the one who impressed the most amount of people was Buatsi. So I can imagine that the GB boxing, what are they called now? They're not called the ABA anymore. It's like GB boxing or England boxing or whatever they're called. They're probably trying everything they can to keep Buatsi amateur rather than getting him to turn over, rather than letting him turn over. You know, letting go of him and watching him turn pro. So David Lemieux versus Eubank Jr. right now. It's a good fight. Very good fight. That is a really good fight. I would love to see Lemieux versus Eubank Jr., you know. Lemieux hits harder. He's more experienced. Eubank Jr. is bigger. He's physically strong. He's fast. One thing about Lemieux, he's a big puncher, but he's very sloppy. Very sloppy. He has poor balance, throws himself off balance all the time, as does Eubank Jr. But I just think Eubank Jr. is a better athlete than Lemieux. And on the outside, being taller, he might be able to get things done. I don't know. I'd love to see that fight. I'd love to see that fight. Simo A says, can Eubank even make 160 anymore? I think he can. I think he can. I guess you don't rate Jamie Cox at middle and super middle. I haven't seen that much of Jamie Cox, to be fair. A couple of his fights, haven't seen that much of him. Levity says, I don't think Eubank Jr. would get into them sort of fights. He already bottled it against GGG and Jacobs fights. He turned down Jacobs' fight and fought Blackwell. And even if you wanted to take those fights, as I said previously in the stream, do the Eubanks have the money? Or ITV going to give them the money to be able to secure these big name opponents? That's the question. Anyway, people, I'm going to wrap up this live stream right now. So thank you for, thank all of you for tuning in. Hopefully I've covered everything on the weekend and all the other topics we've discussed. So yeah, big up everybody for tuning in. There will be more live streams to come. So yeah, shout out to everybody. I'll catch you next time.